Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Joining me now, the next president of the National Rifle Association, Oliver North. Ollie, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thank you, Chris.
I want to start by playing what two students from Santa Fe High said after the shooting. Here they are.
I shouldn't be going through this at my school. Like, this is my daily life. I shouldn't have to feel like that. And I feel scared to even go back.
It's been happening everywhere. I've always kind of felt like eventually it was going to happen here too.
What do you say to young people like that who have come to expect shootings in their schools?
They shouldn't have to. They shouldn't be afraid to go to school. They shouldn't worry about the fact that they might not go home that night because some crazed person comes in with a firearm, which is one of the reasons why the NRA for over 2 years has been advocating a program called School Shield. There's finally legislation for it. I think there's $75 to $100 million appropriated by the federal government to assist in it. Look, if School Shield had been in place in Santa Fe High School, far less likely that would have happened. The problem that we've got is we're trying like the Dickens to treat the symptom without treating the disease. And the disease in this case isn't the Second Amendment. The disease is youngsters who are steeped in a culture of violence. They've been drugged in many cases. Nearly all of these perpetrators are male, and they're young teenagers in most cases. And they've come through a culture where violence is commonplace. All we need to do is turn on a TV, go to a movie. If you look at what has happened to the young people, many of these young boys have been on Ritalin since they were in kindergarten. Now, I am certainly not a doctor, I'm a Marine, but I can see those kinds of things happening and endangering those two gals.
So let's get specific, because this was the 16th school shooting so far this year. That is the most at this point of the year since they started keeping records after Columbine in 1999. 2-3 key specific things that you think would keep our children safe.
Well, one, School Shield would. Because School Shield,
which is what?
It's a program. The NRA introduced it 2 years ago. We'll go do an assessment. Costs the school nothing. Costs the taxpayers nothing to get the assessment as to what the issues are in terms of ingress, egress, the ability to hide a firearm and get it into a school, the number of school resource officers you really need. And very few schools actually have that.
Yeah, but let's just talk about that if I may just talk about that specifically. This school had 2 policemen armed roaming the halls. The school administrator said yesterday they considered Santa Fe a hardened school.
But there was no way to detect a firearm being brought into the building. Look, you and I came through the lobby here in this building where we're sitting right now. There was a security desk there. There was a barrier for us to pass through. You can't get on an airplane today without going through a metal detector.
But I was going to say, there's no metal detector in our building. Are you suggesting that there be a metal detector? And I'm not saying that's wrong. A metal detector at the entrance to every school for millions and millions of schools, students?
Well, if you want to stop the carnage, look, You're not going to fix it by taking away the rights of law-abiding citizens. You've got to fix it in a way that hardens the place sufficiently that those kids are safe inside the door. If that means 5 metal detectors getting in and out of a high school, you get 5 metal detectors.
Okay. Cameron Caskey, one of the Parkland students who has led the March for Our Lives movement, tweeted this after the shooting. Donald Trump does not care about you or your kids getting shot. And here's what you've said about the Parkland school movement. What they did very successfully with a frontal assault and now intimidation and harassment and law breaking is they confused the American people. Question, what's wrong with students like this fighting, they would say, for their lives?
Look at that is taken out of context, as people are fond of saying in our business. I was talking about the people who've organized the harassment, the vandalism, the threats, the hacking, and thrown the full force of the First Amendment against the Second Amendment. And they're leading the cause. These kids aren't the problem. They're being used by forces far bigger than they are to make sure that the Second Amendment goes away.
Who is using the Parkland students?
We know what Mayor Bloomberg was up to. We know what George Soros has funded. I mean, in our business, he's gone. His creations have gone after you, me, and everybody else has ever been at
Cameron
Fox.
Caskey would say he's speaking and working for himself, and those other kids are.
Okay, but my point being, I was not criticizing those kids. Your next guest is going to be a person who's an advocate for more gun control. He's got a First Amendment right just like I do. I believe that what we're doing right now with the National Rifle Association is trying to make sure that kids are protected without taking away the rights of law-abiding citizens. And that's all it's about.
I got less than a minute left. You say that one of your jobs as the incoming president at the NRA is you want to reassure politicians with all of this movement now for gun control that it's a good thing to be associated with the NRA, not a liability. How's that going?
Well, my goal is 1 million more members. We have 6 million now. We've been around since 1871. It took us that long. I want to get 1 million more. And then I'm going to go out and ask every NRA member to recruit 1 more. And that will put 14 million activists on the street. Not the types of George Soros is fielding, not the types that showed up down there in Dallas to protest our right to gather. Those are going to vote for people who support the Second Amendment. That's our cause.
It is Tuesday, the 22nd of May of 2018, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. No Old Bay, folks, no Old Bay in this recipe. Oh, yeah, so we wake up to a constitutional crisis. Well, we were in one when we went to sleep, at least some of us. So, so there's that. But I don't know. I figure since we're still able to go shopping, it'll be okay. Don't worry. Don't think about it. So Rosenstein and Ray and the DNI went to talk with Trump yesterday. Hi. No one really knows what was said. And we won't know until the Russian press tells us, because they were allowed to be there. But we didn't know that yet. We will, though. It happens every time. Yeah. Oh, I love this challenge coin that was stamped for the North Korean summit. This guy, he's all about the pomp and circumstance. He's preparing himself for the pomp and circumstance, but he has no idea what a summit means. What an idiot. But I don't know. People voted for him, and they think he's a smart guy. So what does that make them? I keep telling you. Oh, GOP donor made abortion hush payment through Michael Cohen, and then scored a meeting with Trump one day later. See? Listen. You have to know how to get access. What? You're saying that it might be hypocritical about the whole right to life issue? Hey, does it really matter to them? It's all about winning. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos is testifying before, or will be testifying before the House Committee, Well, that'll be interesting. Because, She just wants to privatize everything. Maybe her brother could handle security for all the schools in America. And that way we wouldn't have these school shootings except by those who are authorized to do it. And you know that will be what happens. Harley-Davidson shutting down their U.S. factory, moving to Bangkok after they scored big on Trump's tax cut. We're out of here. Jesus, there's more freedom in Bangkok than there's going to be here in the United States. Let's get out. Plus, we'll make a lot more money, too. Look at the market. Everybody will want a Harley over there. Jeez. Yeah, that'll be great. Hogs all over the place. Yep. I'm not a big Harley-Davidson fan, but that's just from, I don't know what. I preferred Moto Guzzi's. If you're going to have a big old bike, have a police special. That's just me. Lava's creeping into a geothermal plant. That's going to heat things up. Too bad they couldn't figure out how to harness it. Well, I've always said we're just parasitical growths on the skin of the earth, and pretty soon she's going to be wanting to shake us off. Indeed. Well, there's a lot more that we could go over. But we might as well look at the stories that we've curated for you today. I don't mean to be discombobulated. I decided to maybe add a few items here and there at the last minute. Don't do that. Stay committed to what you decided and don't let all this other stuff. But I had to because you know, it was newer news. That's why they call it news. Well, of course, that was ex-felon and new NRA President, or is he Commandant? Oliver North. Yeah, you know, that seditious bastard. I hate that guy. But a lot of people made him into a hero because they hate America just like he does. Well, he says he's trying to walk back his criticism of the Parkland school students, the survivors of the shooting in Parkland, because they, this Texas shooting here, obviously they're going to lend their expertise, shall we say. Well, he's trying to walk back. He was pretty harsh. And, of course, these are kids who survived. They were right there. Boom, boom, boom. Yeah, Ollie, come on. I know you're a big military guy and you like the sound of guns. Well, he didn't mean to criticize them. He's just calling them dupes of like George Soros and all of the usual suspects. Ritalin. Now, I'm not a big fan of behavioral modification drugs to begin with, but to blame it on Ritalin and our violent culture, this is so rich coming from a guy who shilled for Call of Duty. Yeah, talk about a shoot 'em up. I'll say once again, we could go down the path of creating games in which you try to instill empathy into the player. Instead of shooting up people and breaking down the gate, you figure out a clue of how to open the gate and you keep moving on. Cooperation among the different players is the way you get through. No, let's kill each other instead. It's quicker. Well, Ollie, tell me which is the destruction of our society and which isn't, and who was embodied in the destruction of our society in the basement of the White House. Talk about a child sex ring. Okay, I'm sorry I could go on about Oliver North. I don't know if you could tell, but I hate that guy. On the rest of the menu, Trump is so unpopular that his properties are taking the hit. And, well, they should. Have you ever had a Trump steak? Don't. Just don't. After erasing all mentions of climate change, the National Park Service quietly releases its uncensored report. Does anybody in the leadership of the Park Service know that? We'll find out. And buried in SCOTUS's upcoming assignments is anonymous sign for gerrymandering opponents. It looks like Roberts is going to write the opinion, and that doesn't bode well. Balls and strikes, that guy? Yeah, we know about balls and strikes with that guy. After the break, we'll move to the chef's table, where the third white supremacist is found guilty of beating DeAndre Harris during last year's Charlottesville protest. My only question is he going to get a presidential pardon? He could. And a recent study reveals Republican-appointed judges sentence black offenders to 3 months longer on average than whites. And that adds up over time. Yeah. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. The bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you'll notice to the rightish of the page the chat room link. Our roaring girl Kelly Lincoln does monitor that during the day. And so check up on us there, and she'll check up on what's going on and get back to you. Or might engage you in real time. It could happen. Though she's busy and she has to make rent money too, so come on. To the leftish of the page, on the bottom of the page from the chat room link are the contribute donate buttons, and your generosity keeps our lights blinking appropriately, and that means the bills are paid, and we are unable to do this without you, and thank you very much. Follow Netroots Radio on Twitter at Netroots Radio. We are on Facebook if you want to go there, obviously as Netroots Radio. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam, and I post show notes and links on Daily Co's diary. In fact, it's my diary. Yeah. And I'm, of course, on Daily Co's and have been for quite a while as Justice Putnam. My real name. I didn't make it up. Yep. Okay. So let's start off with out of Share Blue Media. I like Oliver Willis. This couldn't have happened to a more deserving fellow. Trump's efforts, Oliver opens here, to unethically profit from the presidency are falling flat because his personal brand is so toxic and the revenue at many of his properties is coming up short as a result. Couldn't have happened to a better guy. He deserves it. Trump has tried to use the presidency to boost the fortunes of his company, but his toxic brand and unpopular administration keep getting in the way. Unlike his predecessors, he has refused to release his tax returns because he's a mobster and a traitor. And that'll show up in the taxes, and I think Mueller already knows. That's why I think they knew beforehand, too, not Mueller specifically. But if you got Russians, visiting, that usually brings some scrutiny. I know. I used to work in a hotel in San Francisco, and the Russian consulate wasn't terribly far away. Yeah, we had a few visits. Okay, well, but to Trump, because he's a mobster. He thinks this is an affront because they don't, you don't expect, when you're a mobster, you don't expect the FBI and the DOJ to be in your face every single day. But he didn't know that, apparently, when he ran for president, did he? Because he learned American civics. Well, I like to think he learned American civics at that FSB crash course at the Kremlin. For assets, dupes, and idiots. And he could be all three. It's possible in this quantum mechanical world. His whole D.C. hotel continues to be a repository for foreign governments, influence peddlers, and his fellow Republicans. But his other holdings outside the D.C. area are in a slump. Details on his annual financial disclosure reveal that when it comes to corruption, Trump is not a very good businessman. Yeah. Revenues at Mar-a-Lago, Trump's Florida resort, were down 10% in 2017. And much of that downturn came because charities began declining to hold events at the venue after Trump praised rampaging Nazis in Virginia as very fine people. That embarrassing slump comes even as Trump has promoted the resort as the Winter White House, using it as a site for meetings with world leaders like Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. They all know how to play him. And why not do it in his resort? And despite having thus far spent 112 days of his presidency at his golf clubs, reports that the clubs in West Palm Beach, Florida, Jupiter, Florida, and Northern Virginia all reported declines in revenue. His golf club in Bedminster, New Jersey, only had a 2% bump in revenue. Only. Trump refused to follow presidential tradition and divest from his holdings or put his businesses in a blind trust. Pending litigation alleges he's violating the Constitution Emoluments Clause, which bans elected officials from receiving payment from foreign governments. But this is a new, generally Samoan town. He's not encumbered by the usual way of doing things. His entanglements with his old business are extensive. His son Eric has admitted that despite transferring control to him and his brother, Trump still weighs in on family business. Yet despite his efforts at corruption, it isn't producing a torrent of profits. The whole situation is sinking in the depths of ethical muck, weighed down by Trump's unpopularity and his own egregious behavior. As his presidency fails, businesses that no longer want to be associated with his tainted brand are removing his name wherever they can. And, of course, the Trump Organization fight them tooth and nail. No, it's a contract. It is a testament to Trump's incompetence that his penchant for business failure, including at least 4 bankruptcies, even extends to his attempts to profit off the White House. Trump is trying to sell his cachet to the highest bidder while he occupies the presidency, but the stench of failure and corruption is repelling, even to those most inclined to line his pockets. Next offering here at the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, is by Kyla Mandel out of Think Progress. Now, the Park Service had initially erased all mentions of climate change by order of Ryan Zinke, and but the Park Service has quietly released an uncensored report. The uncensored report. The study's lead scientist said she was extremely happy that mentions of climate change were restored. Of course, her career has been destroyed, but, collateral damage all around. In the face of mounting scrutiny over attempts to scrub all mentions of climate change from a report about sea level rise, the National Park Service has finally released its long-awaited report. The uncensored report was quietly released on Friday with no mention by the National Park Service, the Department of Interior, or its Secretary Ryan Zinke's Twitter accounts. The report highlights the climate risks at 118 coastal national park sites. While the impact will vary depending on the location and how much global temperatures increase, the report finds that parks in North Carolina's Outer Banks are at the greatest risk from sea level rise. In contrast to the Trump administration's tendency to ignore or deny climate change and its risks, the report begins. Global sea level is rising. While sea levels have been gradually rising since the last glacial maximum, approximately 21,000 years ago, anthropogenic climate change has significantly increased the rate of global sea level rise. Ongoing changes in relative sea levels and the potential for increasing storm surges due to anthropogenic climate change and other factors present challenges to national park managers, the report states. Now, this release comes after reports by Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting showed that Park Service officials deleted every mention of humans' role in causing climate change in the drafts of the sea level rise report. Well, Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke, who denies the science of climate change, had previously said in his defense that I didn't change a paragraph or comma in any document, and I never would, because he had his underlings do it for him. That's why he flies a flag, to let everyone knows where he's at and when he's in town. He even has a flag that says whether he's sitting with one cheek on the toilet seat one way or one cheek on the toilet seat the other way. He has a different flag for each one. Who does that? Ozymandias. The study's lead scientist, Maria Caffrey, a University of Colorado research assistant, said that she was extremely happy that the report was released with all mentions of climate change restored. Caffrey had worked on the report for 5 years. When she resisted the editing efforts, she was repeatedly told by Park Service officials that the report would not be released if she refused to accept the deletions, or that it could be released without her name on it. The fight probably destroyed my career with the Park Service, she said, but it will be worth it if we can uphold the truth and ensure that scientific integrity of other scientists won't be challenged so easily in the future. Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I'm going to go a little bit over into our break period with this one, but so be it. Ian Millhiser from Think Progress warns us of an upcoming predicament in the SCOTUS's scheduling as they assign cases for each of the justices to research and review. Last October, the Supreme Court heard a landmark challenge to Wisconsin's gerrymandered state assembly maps. There appeared to be a real danger that the state's lawmakers would soon have to compete in a free and fair election. Oh no, oh my, not that. More than half a year later, the fate of partisan gerrymandering appears even more uncertain, and the court just gave a new sign that gerrymandering may yet survive. The court ordinarily tries to distribute work equitably among its members. If it hears 9 cases in a particular month, each member of the court will typically be assigned one majority opinion from among those 9, rather than having some justices write 2 opinions and some write none. For this reason, because then you would have, like Clarence Thomas, not only ever speaking, never, ever, ever speaking, but never writing an opinion either. Weird. For this reason, it is often possible to predict which justice will write a particular case based on who has not yet written a decision from a particular month. Now, before Monday morning, every member of the court but 2, Chief Justice John Roberts and Neil Gorsuch, who occupies the seat Senate Republicans held open for a year until Trump could fill it, handed down one opinion from the court's October sitting. Then on Monday, Gorsuch handed down a 5-4 decision. And in the decision that said all workers have to now go through forced arbitration because we want to torture you. And forced arbitration sounds so much like torture. You'll tell us what we want to know. Trust us. We always do. Well, that means there is only one outstanding case from October, Gill v. Whitford, the Wisconsin gerrymandering case, and there is only one member of the court, Chief Justice Roberts, who has not written a majority opinion from that month. If the court follows its ordinary practice, Roberts will write Gill. And that's very bad news for opponents of gerrymandering. During oral arguments in Gill, Roberts appeared very concerned that the plaintiff's legal theory would require judges to do math. I can only do balls and strikes. I can't add 2 plus 2 equals 4. What if it equals 5? It could equal 5. I'm not qualified to do that. It's too hard and tedious. Roberts' overall approach to election law is animated by a kind of naive conservatism. He does not understand much about how elections work, and his instincts typically favor conservative results. Now, in fairness, it is far from certain that Roberts will write Gill or that Gill will come down in favor of gerrymandering. Until about 2 months ago, the court appeared to be cruising towards a decision striking down at least some partisan gerrymanders. So it is possible that Roberts assigned himself the Gill opinion as a placeholder while his colleagues figure out whether they can assemble an anti-gerrymandering majority. It's also possible that Roberts, who as Chief Justice has the power to assign opinions, strategically voted with the liberals so that he could write a watered-down opinion. It's also possible, if unlikely, that Roberts has come around to view that partisan gerrymanders are unconstitutional. But if you believe that a mandate to govern flows only from the will of the people, you'd have a lot more to smile about right now if Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was the only justice who had not written an October opinion. Well, let's get to our break now, and we'll come back and go through weather from around the world and finish with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
Welcome to 60 Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. In 1798, the U.S. Congress took a page out of colonial history and passed the controversial Sedition Act that outlawed publication of false, scandalous, and malicious statements against the government or Congress. The Alien Acts, which passed in the same year, gave President John Adams, a Federalist, the power to force foreigners to leave the country if he considered them dangerous. These laws outraged Republicans, especially after Federalist judges fined and jailed several Republican newspaper editors and a member of Congress under the Sedition Act. The Alien and Sedition Acts helped mobilize Republicans for the presidential election of 1800. The Sedition Act expired in 1801, and the new president, Thomas Jefferson, pardoned those prosecuted. As a result of the American experience with the Sedition Act, a broader legal definition of freedom of the press prevailed. That's all for today's podcast, 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
Today, a quick quiz. Ready? Donald Trump pledged to totally destroy what law? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. During his presidential campaign and continuing through his presidency, Donald Trump vowed to repeal, in his words, totally destroy, the Johnson Amendment. The Johnson Amendment is a 1954 law named after then-Senator Lyndon Johnson, which says that not-for-profit, tax-exempt organizations like churches cannot endorse or oppose or use their money to endorse or oppose political candidates. Church leaders, of course, have a First Amendment right to speak out on any topic, and churches themselves can give information, express beliefs and values, and oppose policies. But a concerted campaign for a specific candidate for a specific office, that's a bridge too far if you want to remain tax exempt. But that's not what the law should be, according to certain evangelical churches. So, in both 2017 and 18, as part of appropriation and tax bills, those representatives who wanted to join Trump's crusade tried to insert into tax and spending bills language that would have directly or indirectly ended the Johnson Amendment. Do note this. When the present omnibus spending bill ends on September 30th, their fight to scrap this law and tear down the wall of separation between church and state will begin anew, as will the resistance. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1933. That was the day President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed the Tennessee Valley Authority Act. The act created the TVA as a federal corporation and was tasked to address the resource development of the region, one of the poorest in the nation. These included flood control and improved travel along the Tennessee River. It also meant improved forestry to address soil erosion and facilitation of agricultural production. Control of water resources required a series of dams designed to navigate the river and reduce flooding. Though Wilson Dam had been completed before the establishment of the TVA, the authority had embarked on the construction of 16 more dams. During the Depression, the TVA hired tens of thousands of workers for conservation, construction, and development. Historian Eric Loomis notes that though the TVA was one of the region's largest employers of black workers, the authority also maintained rigid lines of segregation in its workforce. He adds that though 14 AFL unions eventually worked on dam construction, the agency initially refused to recognize unions. Workers would have to wait until 1940 to sign first contracts in the anti-union South. Today, the authority is most well known for its supply of electricity to nearby communities. It is the nation's largest public power company and serves about 80,000 square miles in the southeastern United States. TVA capacity to generate electric power includes some 29 hydroelectric dams, 11 coal-fired power plants, 3 nuclear plants, and several combustion turbine installations. It also has several solar and wind installations. The authority produces more than 130 billion kilowatt hours of electricity each year. The TVA played a critical role in transforming the South by constructing infrastructure necessary for modernization and industrialization.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labour.
This is a Radio Labour report recorded on Monday, May 21st, 2018. I'm Mark Belanger. The labor organization, which represents public sector workers across Europe, is taking the European Commission to court in order to protect the right of unions and employers to agree on proposed legislation and have that legislation considered by the Council of Member States. The Commission, which acts as an executive body to the European Union, has told the European Public Service Union, EPSU, that it will not bring forward to the Council an agreement made by the union and the employers. The agreement would affect the rights of almost 10 million workers to be provided with information about changes to their workplaces. I talked to Jan William Houdrian about the situation. Mr. Houdrian is EPSU's General Secretary. I asked him to describe the agreement made between EPSU and the representatives of the central government administrations, the employers.
Our agreement is to come to a general framework for information and consultation rights for central government, civil servants and workers. And when I say our agreement, it's the agreement between the trade unions and on the other side, our employer's counterpart. It refers to the fact that all workers in the EU have information and consultation rights with regard to changes at their workplace.
Give us a little background on this mechanism by which the unions and the employers can come to an agreement and have it considered by the Council of Member States.
Since 1993, the Treaty of the European Union, first as an annex and later incorporated in the body of the text, has the possibilities for the social partners at European level to come to an agreement with the employers, with their counterparts, and then jointly request for this agreement to be brought to the Council, that is the governments of the member states, for them to take a decision, and with that the agreement can be turned into legislation. In other words, we are co-legislators as social partners, and that for the whole of the European Union. That's the 28 countries. So that's quite something, something which doesn't exist somewhere else. So that in itself is already important, and this is part of what we call the European model, the European social model. Now, with the employers in central government administrations, we reached an agreement in December 2015 to close a loophole in European legislation on information consultation rights. There is already legislation, but it applies to workers in private companies and in public companies. It does not apply to workers in public administration. So, following a process of discussion in the European Commission and consultations, we and the employers decided we can close this loophole in EU legislation by this agreement. And so we did, and we reached this agreement in December 2015. The agreement would give workers in central government administrations rights to information and consultation, for example, with regard to changes that affect their workplace, reorganization of their services, with regard to health and safety issues, equality issues. All of these issues are mentioned in our agreement. In the European Union, the European Commission is to look if these social partners are representative, and all of that has happened, and it showed that we were representative. So nonetheless, the Commission took this extraordinary step by denying our agreement. And it really is extraordinary, and that's why we are very concerned about the decision of the Commission.
And that's it. International labor news you can use. Radio Labor's newscasts are available on its website, Facebook, iTunes, union websites, and community radio stations. Follow us on Twitter @Radio Labor. I'm Mark Boulanger. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 Minutes. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro won another 6-year term in office on Sunday in a presidential vote characterized by surprisingly low turnout. Maduro carried the day with 68% of the vote, which he pointed to as a sign of his popularity. But it's worth pointing out Venezuela's opposition formally sat out the election after its two most popular leaders, Leopoldo Lopez and Enrique Capriles, were banned from competing. I asked Jeff Ramsey, a Venezuela expert at the Washington office on Latin America, that if Maduro's policies since he came into office in 2013 have already failed to stem rising unemployment, inflation, worsening food shortages, and sparked a regional refugee crisis as Venezuelans flee the country, surely the next 6 years of Maduro will expose even more policy failings and hand opposition parties more support. Ramsey was skeptical.
People have been saying this for the last 6 years already. This has sort of been the running assumption that this can't continue, that this is unsustainable, and that this government will ultimately collapse.
Instead, Ramsey said Venezuelan leaders see regime survival as a national cause and won't give up power easily. Foreign countries were quick to condemn Sunday's elections as the likes of the European Union, United States, and the 15-member Lima group of countries from across the Americas pledged to scale back diplomatic engagement with Venezuela over the handling of the election. And of the mindset that sanctions brought Iran and now North Korea to heel, there's increasing talk in Washington that Venezuela should also be hit with tougher sanctions. But Ramsey said that's likely to have unintended consequences.
I think all of that is going to have a deep impact ultimately on the Venezuelan people. I mean, they're the ones that are going to suffer the most from this. And I think it's really concerning to hear people talk about these economic sanctions like there's some kind of silver bullet.
Luke Vargas, the United Nations.
you for accompanying us here to the chef's table of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Yes, so let's begin with weather from around the world, and we always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America. It's currently it's just went to 50 degrees. We are experiencing fair conditions currently. Winds are negligible out of the southwest, about 1 mile per hour. Of course, they will be increasing to 5 to 10 miles per hour, but shifting out of the north-northwest. And we will have a high today of about 90. Okay, I'll take it. But we are experiencing dry conditions, though that will change this evening when we will increase incrementally for percentages of precipitation. It'll be mostly clear tonight, though, with a low of around 60. Winds will be out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour, but tomorrow we will have about a quarter inch of rain brought on by thunderstorms with a high in the mid-80s. Oh, yeah. I love thunderstorm activity, so we're expecting about a quarter inch for the next 2 days, and then just a smidgen of about a third of an inch on Friday. Okay. My garden will love it. Grass pollen is still very high in terms of allergies out there. Okay. I'm knocking on wood. Air quality index is good at 22 parts per million, though that is pretty high for good. It's going to be turning into moderate real soon, of course. Daytime UV is also maintaining a very high rating at 8. Take care if you see those numbers in your climate. Pressure is holding steady at 29.84 inches. Visibility is 10 miles, and humidity is at 82%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these personal purchased weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. London is 72 and sunny. Paris is 73 and mostly cloudy. Rome is 70 and partly cloudy. Both Paris and Rome continue to have warnings for possible electrical disruptions due to wind and rain. Okay. Kiev is 73 and fair. Kabul is 61 and mostly cloudy with a lot of wind. Hard to fly those drones and kill wedding parties in those conditions. So now's the time to have a wedding. Hong Kong is 80 degrees and clear. Tokyo is 65 and clear. Sydney, Australia is 60 and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 51 and cloudy, and they have an active small craft advisory warning. Wind gusts up to 50 miles per hour. Steady winds. Wind gusts up to 60 miles an hour. Steady winds 20 to 50. Ouch. And New York is 68 degrees with rain. Wait until it gets muggy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Let's get on here with this offering by Casey Michael out of Think Progress. Daniel Borden, 19, becomes the latest fascist found guilty of assaulting DeAndre Harris last year. One at a time, The white supremacist film last year battering a black man in a parking garage in Charlottesville, Virginia, which was right across the street from the police station, by the way. And the cops used that parking structure. They were safer there. Well, all of them are learning that they will be facing significant jail time. I have a bit of ambivalence about this, especially with a youngster. You know, even though, as we'll see, he has a significant history of law breaking and fascism. But do we really need more white supremacists in the jails? And do we really need to be spreading them around into other jails? Eee. Well, following a series of guilty verdicts over the past few weeks, a judge on Monday, that was yesterday, found Daniel Borden, age 19, guilty of assaulting DeAndre Harris during last August's deadly Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. Borden, who was filmed beating Harris with a stick, all while wearing a white hard hat that read "Commie Killer," entered an Alford plea, effectively admitting that enough evidence existed to find him guilty. Yeah, it's right there on tape. The presiding judge recommended a 6-year sentence for Borden, who will receive his formal sentence in October. Despite his youth, Borden already has a notable history of white supremacist violence and rhetoric. For instance, a former middle school classmate accused Borden of threatening him with a knife and calling him Jew boy. Borden, who had previously been charged with disorderly conduct for threatening a school shooting, also reportedly claimed to be a member of a group called the Brothers of the Confederacy. Borden's sentence is the latest to come against the white supremacist who descended on Charlottesville last year. Others who joined Borden in beating Harris, such as Jacob Scott Goodwin, who recently been found guilty of malicious wounding. Goodwin was seen wearing Nazi paraphernalia in addition to a pin with the symbol for the Traditionalist Worker Party during the beating. Alex Ramos was also found guilty earlier this month. Okay. Well, DeAndre Harris suffered both a broken arm and a spinal injury in the assault. One other white supremacist, Tyler Davis, is still facing charges related to the beating. Of course, you know the President of the United States called the people doing the beating some very fine people. Very fine. The white supremacists who assaulted Harris are not the only Unite the Right participants now facing significant jail time. Richard Preston, a 53-year-old who attended the rally, was found guilty this month of firing a weapon within 1,000 feet of a school. He will be sentenced in August. Such fine people. Very fine.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
David Edwards of Raw Story penned this last piece here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. A study by the National Bureau of Economic Research found that Republican-appointed judges, on average, give black Americans sentences that are 3 months longer than those given to white convicts. In a paper released this month, researchers Alma Cohen and Crystal Yang concluded that a judge's political ideology can impact the sentencing of non-white criminals. Well, how else would you get a Judge Roy Bean? The hang 'em judge. Hang 'em all! In sharp contrast to the prior literature relying on court-level variation, we find economically meaningful and statistically significant evidence that judge political affiliation is a source of disparities in federal sentencing, the authors explained. We find that Republican-appointed judges give substantially longer prison sentences to black offenders versus observably similar non-black offenders compared to Democratic-appointed judges within the same district court. Those liberal judges are just too soft, aren't they, then? The racial gap by political affiliation is 3 months, approximately 65% of the baseline racial sentence gap, the paper observed. We also find that Republican-appointed judges give female defendants 2 months less in prison time than similar male defendants compared to Democratic-appointed judges, 17% of the baseline gender sentence gap. Interesting. Equitability in sentencing, a little closer, but funny. The authors noted that much of the gap in sentencing is largely driven by serious drug and violent offenses and cannot be fully explained by other observable judge characteristics such as judge race, gender, former prosecutorial experience, or proxies for racial bias. Kid smoking some pot. If you're white, traffic violation. Just, don't do it in our face again. Black kid or a Hispanic kid. How about a Hispanic kid smoking pot? Oh, you're MS-13. You're trying to cut off that guy's head. You got to go to jail for the rest of your life, and then we'll deport you. Okay, the study concludes these results indicate that the appointment of federal judges can have profound distributional effects on the criminal justice system in particular because the federal criminal justice system is the source of the largest and fastest growing prison population, with federal judges making tens of thousands of sentencing decisions a year. Wow, this is almost like a prospectus for a business, like a private prison business. Estimates suggest that a 10 percentage point increase in the share of Republican-appointed judges in each court would increase the racial sentencing gap by approximately 5% and the gender sentencing gap by roughly 2%. I guess if you need to make more profit, get more Republicans. The numbers hold up for it, don't they? In Donald Trump's first year in office, the Senate confirmed a dozen of his district court judge nominees, more than any president since Congress created circuit courts with the 1891 Judiciary Act. All because they were held up because the black guy was president. We couldn't have him appoint any judges now, could we? Yeah, well, the coup was in full swing by the time Don Trump got here. Well, hopefully we'll have better news for you tomorrow. I sure hope so in Smothered Benedict Wednesdays, and we'll meet up with you then. But do stay tuned to the rest of the day for breaking news as it breaks, and we will indeed visit with you tomorrow in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Va pleurer sous la pluie de novembre. Tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie d'un novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin l'âge tendre, nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.